Thank you for joining me in the sandbox. I'm April Dawn Patterson, and I invite you to play with me and my guest today, Danielle Park. Welcome, Danielle.
Hi, nice to be here.
Well, in the first segment, we pop into a virtual coffee house before hitting the beach. And being the benevolent host that I am, your order's on me. So, what order do you give the barista?
Oh, well, lately, coffee houses are a big part of my life. Go all the time. It's a big community spot. And my order lately has been half calf Mexican mocha with oat milk.
Nice. I dig
And
the oat milk too. It's
yeah,
gives
I think
it a
everyone
certain.
does. Everyone loves oat milk. So good.
It's great.
You can't go wrong with oat milk.
Well, in your spotlight moments, Danielle, have there been any claims to fame, times that our listeners may have seen you or your work?
Oh, I don't know. If you're in some very particular corners of Instagram, then maybe. I'm Oak Moon Tarot on Instagram. So I've been there for a long time. I've been a very consistent tarot presence in that community. So that's about it.
Well, guests are asked to choose a word or phrase that they would like to hear used more often in everyday conversation, something that doesn't get enough play or enough airtime. And the prior guest chose scintilla. So you are tasked to try and somehow fit that word into our conversation today.
I don't even know what that means. I'm looking it up right now. Scintilla.
Yes.
That's a new vocabulary word for me. Okay. I'm gonna read out this definition in case other people are also like, what?
What
Oh, I
the?
think I knew this. A tiny trace or spark of a specified quality or feeling. Scintilla. Okay, just a little bit of something.
Now, you also get to choose a word for the next guest to dance with. And it could be a peculiar word that you find funny or something that just resonates with you here recently. So, what are you laying down for them to pick up?
Oh my God. This is hard. This is really hard. I have been having such a hard time with words lately, just for the last few days, because my partner and I just got this board game called Very Loud Librarians. And it's like, it's really fun. It's by the people who've made all the Exploding Kittens games. If you are familiar with those, like those folks,
Mm-mm.
they make great games. But anyway, it's like you have to shout out words. They give you a category like red things, and you have to shout out words that start with particular letters across this board that fit into that category. And nothing will make you feel more stupid than that game, because your brain just freezes up. And that's the way I am feeling right now with this vocabulary challenge.
Well,
The
let
only
me.
word that I can think of, honestly, and it's because I've been so obsessed with the Ocean Gate Titan submersible implosion drama, is abyss.
I like that.
Yeah.
And if you cannot find an organic way of introducing the word, different people have handled this different ways. Like shortly into the podcast, some people will just shout it out with no context and be like, okay, I got it out of the way.
Scintilla.
Angela, done. And then
I'm not trying to fold it in.
and then other people they simply forget, and that's completely fine too. So it's just
Well,
an
I'm gonna
added
try.
fun game to kind of tie in different episodes together. So
Yeah.
first of all, I want to ask, what is tarot to you? So this doesn't have to be like a dictionary definition of what is tarot, but what is
Yeah.
tarot to you?
Well, I mean, to me, tarot is my spiritual practice, and it is a tool to connect with my higher power. And it's something that reminds me every day consistently that magic is real and that we live in a universe that is wildly interconnected and much more mysterious and amazing than we can imagine.
I love that. I can tell from what I've witnessed on social media and in your newsletter and in your podcast that you had a relationship with tarot. It wasn't just this thing outside of you. I also wanted to know how you came up with the name Oak Moon Tarot. I love names. I didn't know how I was going to name my child. Like, 'cause
Mm,
I love so many names. And so
I love names too.
when it's not like just in your face obvious where the name came from, there's a story usually. So how did you name your practice?
I don't know if I remember very specifically, but like, here in Central Texas, oak trees are everywhere. I love them. I grew up on a street that has the word oak in it. So I think that's really it as far as like, I wanted that connection to some, it's like a local feeling to my business name. And then I don't know, moons are kind of magical. Throw the word moon in there and it sounds like, a little witchy. So I was down for it.
Well, how did you first become interested in tarot? It's possible that you grew up with it, but I think for a lot of people, it's something that they get introduced to along the line. And a ton of people get introduced to it, but it never becomes a thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, what is your story with tarot? How did y'all make introductions?
Well, I had done a little bit of dabbling in tarot when I was like 13, 14. That was like, I'm going to be really into Wicca now, like sometime in the mid 90s when that was super hip. And so I started dabbling, but it didn't really last and set it aside for years and years. And then when I was going through a divorce much later, I was really just desperate for something to help me through that experience. And I was just like, oh, tarot will do that for me. Like it was just kind of a pull towards that. And it did. And so I was really just using it. I mean, it was a life raft, honestly. So there was some urgency to it.
Do you have any idea as to why it and not any of the other myriad of spiritual practices that are out there? Was it simply because you had exposure to more of that than other modalities, or what do you think called to you, like
Um,
accessibility of it? Or
I mean, it's tangible, right? Like so many spiritual practices that can feel like in some ways there's nothing that talks back to you, like for instance, in more traditional prayer or meditation, there's a lot, and not to say that those things don't have value, because of course they do, but there is an element of like the conversation can feel one-sided in those kind of spiritual practices. And I needed something that was like, I needed to be talked back to.
mm,
And tarot does that.
it does.
And also I like art, and it is looking at 78 beautiful little pictures. So it's very satisfying.
How did you learn tarot? Was there a course you took, or you self-taught, or
No, I mean, I just read a million things. And that's the way that I think a lot of people learn tarot this way, because it's helpful. Like I would do my practice in the morning, which would be like pulling one or maybe a few cards. And then I would just pile books around me. And if I pulled like Six of Swords that day, well, I'm going to read 7 different sources, definition, interpretation of Six of Swords. And I wrote down words in my journal, keywords, and I underlined and I highlighted, and I went to the internet, so it was just like, research over time, and then seeing how that played out in my real life. So it took a long time. I mean, learning tarot takes a long time. That's just a fact.
I think at one point, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think you did not read reversals, but now you do sometimes. So let's start with what would be reasons not to read reversals, and we'll touch on other points later. So what would be points not to?
Yeah, reversals are something that I will continually struggle with throughout my practice, and that I like let fall in and out. And mostly because reversals can really stimulate anxiety and self-doubt. I mean, that's really why. They're really very challenging often. Even if you have a firm grasp on like how you want to interpret reversals in your practice, which I do, like I have a way that I look at them that feels accessible and non-threatening, which is simply that energy is difficult to access. for whatever reason. It's energy that's not fully and wholly accessible. That's easy. And yet I'm still aware that they can stir up and agitate my anxiety, which is generally pretty high. And one of the reasons that I use tarot to try to like work through that. So if there's any part of my practice that is heightening and ramping that up rather than soothing it, then I try not to do that for a while, like take it out. So whether that's reversals or, you know, certain kinds of questions or whatever, like I just set it aside until I feel like I have more capacity to look at those things.
So what would be an example of a question that you might set to the side for later?
Well, mostly future oriented questions.
Okay.
Yeah, because I mean that's what anxiety is, right? It's like fear of what could happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I find future oriented questions to be sometimes very not helpful, you know? Like when you are dealing with anxiety, then you want to be pulled back into the present moment, grounded, and reminded of the value of the present moment. And so anytime that anxiety is high, I think that's what our practice needs to be focused on. And I think that's more helpful generally anyway. Like I'm not a very future oriented reader most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know some readers, they don't even, like, say a client comes to them with a very fate-based question, like, is this going to happen? Or will I find the love of my life this year? Some of them will refuse to answer that kind of question and try to help the client craft the question in a different way, such as, what could I do to better my chances of meeting the love of my life? Or what are some obstacles in my life that could be keeping me from connecting with that loving relationship? Or so do you have similar guidelines that you use? Or
And I don't like flat out refuse to pull cards for the future if that's what people want. You know, I just make sure to frame it in such a way that it's like, there is no certainty, you know, like this is what you're oriented towards, or this is what you may encounter. And let's hold that really loosely and make sure that we are asking those other questions like you were talking about, you know, like what's the work that I need to do to be available to this, whatever, to make it more empowering rather than just here's a card and you can sit around and wait for this. That's dumb. Doesn't make a lot of sense. So I do try to make sure that most of the reading is oriented around empowering the present moment. And I actually find that a lot of people don't want cards about the future. I don't tend to attract people into my practice that are really set on fortune telling, you know, which I'm grateful for because I find there's much more value in looking at what's here now and how can I grow and blah, blah, blah.
we talked about what are some reasons not to read reversals. Okay, one episode I listened to, you didn't read reversals, and then the next time I think you had picked it back up again. Was there a single event that changed your opinion about reversals?
No, this shit's changing hour by hour. I mean, truly, you know, it's like maybe I'll go through a little spell where it will last for some weeks or what have you, but generally it's ebbing and flowing very quickly. And even within the course of a single spread, if I'm reading for myself, or even sometimes if I'm reading for other people, I will turn cards around and etc. You know, and it's really fine. You can just be guided by your hunches, you know, your intuition around what needs to be read in what way. And I mean, very often the cards that are upright are the ones that are showing up. It's shadowy, which is a way that a lot of us, we tend to approach reversals as like, oh, this card is showing up in a shadow aspect or what have you. But I find that that can happen no matter what position a card is in, you know?
Yeah. There's plenty of cards that have shadow in them. Even though, right. The devil card is coming to mind.
Yeah.
Tell me if you do other things. I only see you do tarot, but it is a consistent tarot presence and you keep it fresh. So it's not like, I don't know, I guess maybe some people like myself, I would be tempted to think if I just settle down with this one modality, I might get bored with it and I don't want to. so I might not marry it, so to speak, or
Mhm.
but you constantly find ways of incorporating tarot into different things. For example, there's a tarot poetry event that you host. Can you tell us how often you do that and how people can sign up for that?
Yeah, well, I was doing it every week, although I put it kind of on hiatus for the summer because summer is a totally different animal when you have children, you know. But yeah, we just meet on Zoom and I read poems out loud and I read each poem twice. People pull cards while we listen to this poem and then we just talk about the cards that we pulled, you know?
And
It's
how
just
they
kind of a
how they
contemplative.
applied to the poem?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, really, that's probably the way that I have personally learned about the cards the most is reading poetry and pulling cards. It's just a really beautiful practice.
Well, that's another way that you keep it fresh because you'll bring to the audience's awareness either a book or a quote or a song, and it can be
Mhm.
very contemporary things.
Yeah.
And you make the tarot relevant by
Yeah. Well, I
bringing
mean,
that
the
up.
tarot is just a way to describe life. So you can put it anywhere and it can describe anything. I love to pull cards while I watch TV. It's great. That's another really good way to learn about the cards and how they can apply to different situations. It's great. Grey's Anatomy is really good for that. I pull cards when I'm sitting in the coffee shop, kind of watching people, you know? I just want to know what these archetypes are saying and what they can describe. And I want them to continually get bigger and bigger. And they will. Like you can never learn everything. Like, that's impossible. Because I really do believe that the tarot can describe any single thing that we could experience. And there's only 78 cards, which when you're first learning tarot, that feels like a lot. But then when you start to think, oh, these 78 cards really have to describe anything and everything, that's a tall order.
Mhm.
But they can. And it's really amazing.
One of my favorite tools with my tarot practice is an app called Tarot Journal,
Hmm.
and
I don't know about that.
it allows me to track my readings, and then I could
Mhm.
also do a search if I needed to. Like,
Hmm.
when have I ever drawn
Oh.
the Four of Cups or something like that? And then I can
Mhm. Back in time
go
and
back in time and see if I
Mhm.
journaled about that particular card that day, and it's really neat. And then you can add other people as well,
That's
and you
cool.
can add extra decks. So it takes a long time to exactly center each card in that 78 deck, but
Yeah.
you can load a new deck, and then so you can pick which deck you used for
Huh.
that reading. I have
Interesting.
loved it. It's been really, really cool.
That's cool.
And I forgot where I was going with that. But I think I was just going to say that it is amazing how sometimes the card can be speaking symbolically, and then other times very literally.
Mhm.
I have this tarot chat going on Telegram, and one of the ladies, she drew, you'll be able to tell me, but it's where maybe five of pentacles, I'm not sure. Anyway, it's where these two crippled people are walking past a church.
Yeah. Mhm.
Is that five of pentacles?
Yep. Mhm.
Okay, cool. So anyway, she pulled it that morning, and then she ended up hurting the same leg that was injured in the card.
Mhm.
So it was, there have been so many really interesting synchronicities. And maybe you can tell us about some of your favorite, some things that have been really fun and emphasized to you. Maybe every reading is this way for you, but sometimes it's like, wow, this was so spot on. Like, how can you question it? But
Mhm.
this one day I pulled the King of Wands and upright. And I was wondering what this was going to mean when my boss, my employer, he had been out of sorts for some time. And then all of a sudden it was like nothing happened. He was back to his regular self. And so to
Mhm.
me it was like it was righted.
Mhm.
This
Yeah.
this male authoritative figure in my life, he was righted.
Yeah.
And So
Yeah. I mean, that stuff happens all the time, I feel like, so it'd be really hard to choose one. Like very recently on Father's Day, I just pulled a card for what has my father taught me about the world. And I pulled Six of Swords, which if you'll remember is people in a boat. And my dad was a merchant marine and he was at sea for like
oh,
most
wow.
of my childhood. So yeah, that's what he taught me about the world, that it was a really big place and you could get anywhere by boat, and he taught me about traveling, and so it was very perfect.
Well, I would encourage any of the listeners to follow you on social media and your newsletter because, for example, on Father's Day, you shared that you share spreads all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you come up with some really provocative, thought-provoking questions. And I might not have thought I needed to pull a card up to that point, but then once I see your questions, I'm like, I totally I need to know the answer to this. And so let me pull some cards. So
Mm-hmm.
you come up with some great spreads.
Oh, thanks.
So
It's
thank you
very
for
fun.
that. And this is something we can cut out again later if you don't feel comfortable with it. But I wanted to know if you could give me a little mini reading.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I pulled two cards for a spread that you had put in your newsletter
Okay.
about the truth. And that was
Okay.
like a really great newsletter. I loved everything you said in there. And it was a two card spread. The first card, I'm sure you remember, it was like, only when I view this part of me with intimate and loving compassion
Mm-hmm.
will I then be able to see this truth, which was the second
Okay.
card. Okay, so the
Okay.
first card was the Eight of Wands.
Okay. So that's the part that you need to view with compassion. It's Eight of Wands.
Yep. And then
Okay.
the second card was the Sun reversed.
Okay.
So what would you say that would mean?
Do you tend to be someone who is really impulsive and moves towards things really quickly and is always go, go, go?
Yes.
And do you tend to judge yourself for that? Like, am I manic? Am I ever gonna like be able to slow down? What's your narrative around it?
I think what I judge is that when I don't see any progress made on those things. So
Mhm.
in astrology, I'm a Scorpio rising, so it's a Mars ruled chart.
Mhm.
And I love action. I love accomplishing things, not sitting thinking about it, but getting it done. And several of my friends have said that that's one of the things that they admire about me most is that I take action and that I do all these things. But
Mhm.
the judgment that I hold about it is that it doesn't seem to accomplish anything. Like I don't have anything to show for the action that I take, if that
But you're
makes sense.
experiencing like joy and enthusiasm around it while you're like, does like that energy like feed you?
Yes, I like to do things, but I when I was thinking about this card, how that could be a negative thing or my narrative around it is negative,
Mhm.
I do know at least of one individual who has told me that I trigger her. So I think it's like that part of me is, I don't know, something about it may rub some people the wrong way.
Mhm. Like you're too much.
I could be too much.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would first of all take that sun and turn it right side up. This is one of those instances where I would just be
Okay.
like, okay, let's turn that right side up. And, reframe that from, oh, my energy is too much. I'm so impulsive. I'm always like, go, go, going. I wish I could sustain things or slow down or whatever you're saying to yourself around it. And just start to view it as, oh, this is just something essential to me. The sun is like embracing that essential, enthusiastic, joyful part of ourselves. And can you learn to see that it's just like energy for its own sake? It is
Mhm.
good to engage with. That feels delicious to you. And it doesn't have to result in anything, because
Right.
that's what is talking there, probably capitalism, right? Where it's like everything has to end in something that's a product, or everything we do needs to, I don't know, be efficient or get us somewhere, get us further down the road,
Right.
you know?
Hmm.
That's what I would say about those two cards.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that. Speaking of the different things that you do, is your Patreon still active?
Well, I mean, technically, but I haven't been posting there in forever. And that is something that has been like keeping me up at night because I need to get back on it. And there's a lot of good content that's on there, but I haven't been adding to it in a really long time. So yeah, it's a sticky thing. I need to do it. There is like only so many hours in the day, and I wish that I could devote all of my time to tarot content creation, but I can't. I have to make a living. So
So,
it's been difficult.
so that being said, tarot is not your living?
It's part of my living, but it is not the only thing that sustains me. I'm also a body worker, and so that's what I do most of the time. And that's a very labor intensive job.
That is so cool. I was thinking about, so tomorrow's my birthday, and I was thinking about what I might want to gift myself. And I was thinking about revisiting a body worker that I had only visited once. But it was such a neat experience that I would want to do that again. So that's really cool
Yeah,
that you do that.
yeah.
Do you find when you do the body work that you get any type of like psychic messages or
No. I mean, the way that intuition works for me is like, because I'm doing mostly like deep massage, right? And so I just touch people and they're like, oh, yeah, that's exactly where I'm hurting. Yeah.
Hmm.
And that's nothing to do with me. I mean, I don't know. It's just my hands know what they're doing, but I can't take any credit for it. And I'm certainly not having any sort of visions or anything that I could relay to somebody.
Mm,
Yeah.
gotcha.
But it is like a body-based intuitive thing.
Very cool. I just wanted to mention that the one of the cards I had pulled on Friday, I had pulled the Queen of Pentacles. And I generally I do that right before work. I'll pull my card of the day, and then what I'll do is on my way to work, I will listen to a podcast from Tarot Bites. However,
Mm-hmm.
she lumps all of the court cards together, like all of the queens together,
Mm-hmm.
in one episode. And I was like, I actually want to hear about this card specifically. So
Yeah.
I looked, and lo and behold, we had already scheduled at this point. You had a recent a podcast
Mm.
episode on it. And
Oh
so,
yeah, when I talked about Page of Cups.
yes.
Mm.
Well,
Was it Queen of Pentacles and
it was
Page of
Queen
Cups
of
together?
Pentacles. Yeah. Water
Hmm.
and earth make clay,
Yeah.
aging, the Queen of Pentacles. So I
Hmm.
listened to that, and I have to say that your partner, I think y'all are a fantastic pair on the podcast. The energy that both of you bring. Do you think that you would be doing the podcast without their help or prompting? Because it seems like you're, it's not that you come to the microphone kicking and screaming, which you don't, but you're just there with a lot of encouragement, and you can do it. That's given to
Hmm.
you by
Hmm.
your partner. So
Yeah. Well, I can say with 100% certainty that I wouldn't be doing it without them because I don't know how to work any kind of technology. So for that very fact alone, it would never happen because I'm a little bit of a Luddite. It's like this microphone that I'm in front of, don't let it fool you. Like I can barely make this thing work. Yeah. So I don't have a lot of motivation around showing up in big ways or visible ways. I'm a pretty withdrawn, introverted person. So it's much easier for me to just like hang back and not show up.
and your partner is big into the Enneagram, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So Enneagram is one of the few, it's one of the first modalities that I was introduced to when I got into the spirituality slash
Mm-hmm.
woo scene. And so I very quickly identified my number. I'm a 1.
Okay.
Do you mind telling us what you and your partner, what number you identify?
Yeah, I'm a 4 and my partner is an 8.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. We're the intense emotional realists. So
Well,
it
it
can be
seems
a lot of energy.
just like you don't see tarot as being this one limiting thing, but you expand it to include everything. It seems like your partner has done the same thing with the Enneagram, where they don't get bored with it, right? It grows to encompass everything. And so you can never really get bored with this.
Well, yeah, because I mean, that's what the Enneagram is, right? It's like the lens through which we are seeing the world and moving through the world. So it is the filter over everything.
So do you guys find yourself ever bringing in tarot and Enneagram into your interpersonal communications or your everyday stuff?
Oh yeah, all the time. All the time. I mean, we are very aware of our type patterns. And so that is always a topic of conversation, especially when conflict comes up or we're working through whatever issues, either individually or together. You know, we can talk about it in that framework, which is a great framework to have because it depersonalizes things a little bit. You know, it's like it's taking a step back and seeing our patterns for what they are, but they're not like the truth about us, the essential truth about us. We don't have to take our bullshit so personally. So that's helpful. And then tarot stuff, I mean, we use tarot together to, like, we do readings together and things to inspire conversation or to look at stuff that's going on. It's just fun.
Well, how can people find out more about you and follow what you're making in your own sandbox?
Well, I'm on Instagram. I mean, that is the most accessible place probably because I post there a fair amount, and that is Oak Moon Tarot. That's everywhere. That's Oak Moon Tarot everywhere. So it's my website, oakmoontarot.com. I have a YouTube channel that is, again, like very infrequently updated, but there is some stuff on there. It's also Oak Moon Tarot. Podcast, Oak Moon Tarot Podcast. I mean, I'm pretty easy to find.
I love how in the Lifestylist podcast, Luke Story ends his pods asking his guests this question. He may not do this anymore, but when I was listening, he did. So I include it in mine. Who have been 3 teachers or teachings in your life that you might share with our audience that they could go research and also learn from?
I can think of some specific, like 2 specific books, and I'll try to think of a third one. One is The Naked Now by Richard Rohr. That book is incredibly beautiful. It's great. Richard Rohr is a Catholic or he's a Jesuit. It doesn't matter if you can come to this with lots of misgivings about Christianity and still get a lot out of that book. He doesn't write about it in a way that feels gross or othering in any way. But it's all about non-dual thinking, The Naked Now. It's very lovely. And then the book that's taught me the most about tarot, actually, without having anything to do with tarot, is the book Sacred Contracts by Carolyn Myss. And she was a very popular teacher in the probably early to mid 90s because she started out as like a medical intuitive, and she's a really amazing woman. But this book, Sacred Contracts, is all about archetypes and like the archetypes that we have contracts with throughout our life. And so because she's talking about archetypes, she's talking about the tarot, so it's a very beautiful way to understand how the tarot can work in our lives and one of the reasons why it works so well, even though she's not talking, about it explicitly. What else? I don't know. Let me shout out just Mary Oliver, because why not?
I love it. I mean, this is not the first episode that she's shown up, so
yeah, because her work is amazing work. I just love her so much. To me, she is Knight of Pentacles in the tarot, and she's a Virgo, and Knight of Pentacles is the Virgo card. And if you want a card that tells you to go on long walks, it is Knight of Pentacles, and that's what Mary Oliver is known for, is all the time that she spent walking, in the woods and by the pond and on the beach and all these places, and that's where she got inspired. And Knight of Pentacles and Virgo are ruled by Mercury, which is the magician, which is all about inspiration and being available for inspiration. And so I just think that's really beautiful.
On some of the most recent spreads that you've done, I love the deck that you use. Do you know which one I'm talking about? What do you use most often?
Can you describe the artwork at all?
It's, shoot.
Because because I use many. The one that I've been using a lot lately is called the Unfolding Path Tarot. I use This Might Hurt a lot. I use the Susurrabito a lot, the Vinder deck. Those are the ones that I use the most often, at least the ones that I'm posting on Instagram.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's one of those four then.
Yeah.
Well, do you have a deck handy where you could draw a card for us to end on?
Yeah, I always have a deck.
And since you have an excellent way of creating, I think it's an art of asking questions, what is the question that you will be asking the deck?
For us in this moment?
Yeah.
Let me think about this. Trying to think of something that can be a little bit interesting, but also universally applied. Well, the world is a little bit of a scary place right now, and it feels like there's a lot of uncertainty, and I get filled with a little bit of anticipatory dread daily, just kind of like, what's next? How are things going to unfold? And that can feel pretty overwhelming. And so that a question, like I ask a question that's very similar to this often, is just like, how can I trust that I have the capacity to encounter what's next?
I love that.
Because I often want the deck to tell me that everything's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that doesn't really work out, Most of the time when I ask those kind of questions, tell me everything's going to be fine. Tell me I'm going to be safe, then I'll pull a card like the Tower. It's like, no, we can't tell you that because there are no assurances in this life. And you can't have certainty and shit's going to happen. So then the question really has to be like, so how can I be strong enough to meet that? So, okay. So how can I trust? No, you know what? It's not even trust, it's grow. How can I grow my capacity to meet what's next? How can I grow my capacity? So we're going to put that into the plural. So how can we as a collective grow our capacity to meet what's next? Okay. Well, I pulled the Hierophant.
Oh, wow.
I mean, first of all, that's kind of like a lean on your spiritual practices kind of thing. But I think because we do live in a culture that's everyone's a self-styled expert on everything, I think this is kind of reminding us that we actually do have a lot of people around us who know what the fuck they're talking about. And maybe we could listen to them, and take their teachings and really learn to heed people's advice and lean on people a little more than we do, rather than feeling like we've got to figure it all out on our own, I know that I tend to fall into that trap of being like, oh, I feel so much uncertainty, but I've got to solve that on my own. Or I've got to work my way through that uncertainty on my own. And there's so much help, There's so much help. And the Hierophant is about leaning on that. And not just through individual teachers and spiritual leaders and all that, although that's very true, but also just through tradition and finding traditions that support us and teach us how to move forward.
I couldn't see because of the camera, but that's another thing that sometimes different people have different methods for pulling a card. How do you do it? Do you shuffle and wait for one to fall out, or do you just
I spend some time doing this sort of deal, shuffling like that. I don't know if you can see that. I do that a few times, and then I sit here and I'm doing this. And I'm just doing that until I feel, I don't know, like it's good. And then I just flip the one on the top. You can do it. You can do whatever you want.
However you want. Exactly. And however people do it, it's right for them. So it's like, there's no wrong way of doing it.
No, there's really not. No rules at all, in my opinion.
Well, Danielle, thank you so much for joining me in the sandbox. Much love to you, and we'll see you over at Oak Moon Tarot.
Thank you. Scintilla, I forgot, but there it is.